let's get started. We are on Apologetics number 3 of an 8 lesson series. Today is going to be about 2 topics. Does God exist? And did Jesus exist? Hey, Rose.
Hey, good morning.
So these topics these might sound really weird to a group of Christians who are, for most intents and purposes, believers. So to ask, does God exist, might be like that kind of sounds weird. But you have to remember, the purpose of apologetics is to speak to people who don't believe in God and don't believe in Jesus. And our job is to try to give them some evidence or information that there is a God, and so they can make a decision, or to remove obstacles. You know, Allie's story last week about her neighbor got me thinking a lot. He was on my mind this whole week. This is a man who grew up in church. He believes in God, or believed in God. He saw evidence of God, but for some reason, something happened, right? And at some point in our apologetics stance or our discipleship, it's not only about slamming people with scripture. Sometimes we have to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So today we're going to talk about first, does God exist? So what this comes down to basically is it creation or is it Big Bang? It's really those two things. And there's people who believe in both, and I respect everybody's opinions. And again, at the end of the day, I can't prove either one of them, right? I think it takes more faith to be an atheist than to be a believer. Because I think it's harder to find information that says God doesn't exist than to get information that suggests God may exist. And hopefully I'm going to share some of this. As I was joking earlier, there's a lot of astrophysics in this. I'm not a physicist. Wasn't my strongest thing in high school. I'm not an astronomer, but I'm going to give you scientific proof that the universe was not a Big Bang. You can do what you want with the information. That's what I'm here to do. I lay out the information. You choose. So some of the things we've heard about before, some of the questions. Is there anything beyond what we can see and touch, right? Is the universe self-sufficient and uncaused? Did the universe come about by random motions without any plan, any design, or any purpose? In other words, was there a Big Bang? Okay, that's one side to think about. The other side is there a being outside the universe? Is there something above matter, space, and time, right? Is there a God? Is there a supreme being? Whatever you want to label this thing, is there that out there, right? Those are the 2 questions. Now, this is a hard one because how can you even be sure that a being exists or doesn't exist, right? This gets down to some philosophy and to some basic common sense. So if someone came to talk to you and they had no background at all about anything with God, how would you define the concept of God? Okay, that's even a tricky one. And I'm not trying to stump anybody here. I'm just trying to give you all these things that we have to think about when we're trying to witness to somebody. And again, we have to think about somebody who has no information. My presupposition in here is that we all believe in God and Jesus. That isn't necessarily true for the people we talk with. We know that, okay? So the demonstration of the existence of God is not a trivial matter. This is what I wrote in my notes, right? I'm only going to have the opportunity to give you 3 important things today. Again, I'm just going to give you the tip, right? Listen, apologetics, the iceberg is so deep. I'm giving you the tip. I'm giving you 3 of the main arguments for the existence of God. There are numerous, but I'm going to give you the 3 that you most likely can latch onto and be able to share with other people. So before we look at the evidences for God's existence, you have to remember this, presuppositions, right? If somebody is opposing the possibility that there is a God, it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them. If their presupposition is, Donnie, there is no God, I can give them evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence, and they're just going to rationalize it away. This is what I was talking about with Allie's friend, right? Something else is behind this man. Remember the movie God's Not Dead? You guys ever see that? Mm-hmm. That professor trying to prove God wasn't real. Well, at the very end of that, the student who stayed, what a great example of apologetics this kid was. At the end, he gets the professor to lose his temper and say, I hate God. And the student wisely says, Professor, how can you hate a God that doesn't exist? Bang, you got him, right? You got him. So it wasn't the fact that he didn't believe in a God. He had an obstacle to seeing God, like probably Allie's friend does. So some of the times our job in apologetics is to remove those barriers, uncover what's behind there to really get them to be able to hear the evidence up here and then connect these two, okay? So again, we're not fighting to win an argument. We're fighting to share a truth, right? We're not fighting against an unbeliever. We're fighting against unbelief that people hold. It's very hard not to make this personal when you see things going on in the world, but that's a struggle that I have to work on. Now, here's another thing that I want you to understand. Nobody can know definitively that there is no God. If you're going to tell me I know definitively, that suggests that you have absolute knowledge of everything in the universe that have ever happened. And of course, we don't have that. We have incomplete knowledge. No one can know that. So if you can get someone to say, do you have absolute knowledge of everything that's ever happened? Well, of course not. Well, then you can't know that God doesn't exist. Isn't it possible that there is a God? Well, I guess it's possible. Okay, let's just start there, okay? So let me talk about anthropology for a second. You guys know what anthropology is. It's the study of humankind, right? They look at cultures and origins of species and customs and beliefs in certain cultures. In anthropological research, this is around the entire planet. Every single culture, it's indicative that there's a universal belief in a God. It may not be Yahweh that we believe in, or our God, but universal belief in some other being that's out there. That's in any culture. The most farthest, remotest, primitive people in the world believe that. It's been there since the beginning of time. Now, that has gone from one to many gods over time. So you look at cultures and how the culture was developed. There's polytheistic people out there that believe in a lot of gods. We know that. But it all started with this believing that something else is out there, okay? So I'm going to give you some stats in just a minute to show you what that looks like. But is it possible to say that all those billions and billions of people around the world are wrong and the very small percentage is right, that there is no God? That doesn't make sense to me, okay? Now, this is a 2023 statistical poll in America and the world. 2023 US poll, 4% of Americans claim to be atheists. I would have guessed higher. I would have guessed closer to 10%, but I didn't do the poll. But 4% of Americans claim no God in America. That means 96% believe that there's something bigger. So the majority versus the minority, you choose. The world, 16% of the world in 2023 have no religious beliefs, either completely atheist or agnostic. So again, 84% of the world believe something else is out there. Okay, so again, statistically, it makes sense there's the possibility for the existence of a being. Okay, we're getting there. So again, the arguments for God's existence are vast. We don't have time to get them all. I'm going to give you three today. The cosmological argument, cosmos, universe. Teleological argument, which is about specific design. It's absolutely beautiful. And then moral arguments, which is the one that we have to really pay attention to. Okay? Now, remember what I said about apologetics. Apologia, to give a defense. Think about a courtroom. When a lawyer is laying out his case in a courtroom, he's going to do three things. He's going to give evidence. This is why I think my client's not guilty. He's also going to remove doubt from people, eliminate the possibility that something else is going on. Then after we do that, then they're going to draw a conclusion on what makes the most sense based on the facts and based on taking the other things out. That's how lawyers and juries make decisions. That's what these arguments for the existence of God do. Let me give you an example from the Bible. Psalm 19 verses 1 through 4 says this. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Their voice goes out all over the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So this is an example of, you see number one, facts. You see the awe and the beauty and the order of nature, the stars, right? And when you see that, that demands a source. Now you can assume that a Big Bang happened. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, and we'll see that that's probably not the case, right? But we also see that seeing all that, kind of in your mind, you have to think to yourself, something had to put that there in the beginning, right? So that's removing the possibility of chance. So the natural kind of inclination is to say there's got to be something higher. That's just a logical sequence of events. All right, let's get into the cosmological argument. Okay, so this is based on natural theology, okay? Sometimes this is called the argument for universal causation. So this is, did God do it, or was there a big explosion? That's basically what it comes down to, right? Now, this whole argument, I want you to use, this is all common sense. This argument is based on the common sense perception that everything we see is dependent on something else. Think about that, right? Everything we see is dependent on something else. That is its cause. Nothing exists on its own. Think about that. Nothing exists on its own, okay? Things are caused, whether it's a person, an animal, a butterfly, a fish, coral reef. Things are caused to begin, to continue to exist, and then to die. That's the natural order of things, okay? So from this common sense conclusion, there has to be a creator that started it all in the beginning, right? Or you can go back to the Big Bang. We'll get to that. Now, this argument has been used by many, many people for hundreds of years. Even philosophers that are not Christians, people like Aristotle and Plato, both hold to this argument of the cosmology proves something greater is out there. They may not say it's the God that we serve, but they know something greater is out there, okay? And also Christian and Islamic theologians and philosophies talk about the cosmological argument for the existence of God. Now, Islam might call their God something different than we do, but they believe something else is out there, okay? That's the point. Now we're gonna get into some deep stuff, so I'm not trying to sound smart. I'm giving you the research that I did. This is not my strong point, okay? You will understand that research and our technology over the past several years have, the limits of the universe have come closer. We can see what's going on way out in the universe, way out in other galaxies, right? Astronomers and physicists now understand the design characteristics of our universe, and I'm going to give you some statistics in a minute, okay? Probably the most remarkable thing that scientists have done in the past 30 years is they figured out that there's things called universal constants, things that are in the universe that have never changed since the beginning, and if they change at all, we will cease to exist, okay? Universal constants. And what this research has suggested is even the most minute changes in any of these constants, and I'll give you a few of them in a second, would cause the entire universe to be unsuitable for life to live, okay? There's at least 100, there's more than 100, documented scientific papers. And if you want to read one of these, you better put your thinking cap on, because this is some super high science. Like, it's hard to read this stuff. Over 100 examples of these, some of the smartest people on the planet, not just in America, all over the world, looking at these universal constants. Let me give you a couple examples of these. You'll know some of these from physics, from high school, or if you took physics in high school, in college, you'll understand this. So this all speaks to the fine tuning that is required in the universe just to have the possibility of life on this planet. Okay, so this is way out there. So there's four fundamental forces in the universe, right? You'll know some of these. Strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. Those two I understand, the other two, not so much. But it's okay, I'll try to do my best to explain these to you. So what these researchers and scientists have discovered is if any of these universal forces were even 2% stronger or 2% weaker, the entire universe would be unable to sustain life, okay, 2%. Let me talk a little bit about this, the expansion rate. You guys have heard about the expansion rate of the universe. That doesn't mean the universe is expanding into something else. That's not what it means. This was kind of first theorized by Edward Hubble, the guy with the Hubble telescope, 1929. What this actually is the distance between gravitationally unbound parts of the universe within time. So it doesn't mean it's actually getting bigger. It just means things are a certain distance apart and they stay there. Now, this constant has been fine-tuned to an accuracy, listen to this, of 1 part in 10 to the 55th power. So 1 in 10 with 55 zeros after it. This is how fine-tuned that this expansion rate of the universe is. If that is off by even a minutia, we don't exist. Is that by chance? Maybe, maybe not. Let's talk a little bit about mass density. You've heard about mass density before. Mass density of the universe just determines how efficiently nuclear fusion happens in the cosmos. Fusion produces energy and power and keeps the stars hot. We have to have that or we don't survive. Okay, here's the interesting thing about the mass density. If the mass density, this is at the very beginning, okay, there was a big bang, let's just say 2 huge planets, and who knows where they came from, but they just happened to be there, and they hit each other and exploded at the very beginning of creation. If there was too much mass density, then too much deuterium would have been produced. You probably have heard deuterium before. It's an isotope of hydrogen. It's all about what's inside the nucleus and how it holds the nucleus together. If there was too much deuterium made at the beginning of the universe's existence, the stars would have burned too rapidly, too hot, and too fast, and they never would have been able to come into existence. They wouldn't have stayed. And if those stars didn't all stay in existence, everything else is dependent on them around them, we wouldn't be here. Now, on the other hand, if there was too little mass density, then too little deuterium would be made, there wouldn't be enough helium made, and all the other isotopes that come from helium, the heavier elements, would not have formed in the stars. Let me give you a number with the stars. This is what this means. Of the 100 billion trillion, that's the number, 100 billion trillion. Yeah, I know, Joe, I see you trying to do the calculation over there. I couldn't do it. I couldn't even write it down, right? This is the stars that they believe are in the universe that we can see. 100 billion trillion. No more, no less are needed for life to be possible in this universe. That's just to have the possibility of having life on one planet called Earth, okay? So that mass density has to be so precise and so specific for life to develop, okay? So astronomers have discovered that the characteristics and the parameters of our universe are so finely tuned. The only thing you can kind of surmise from that is there has to be a personal, intelligent creator that did it all. Is it possible that two planets collided? Think about how big the two planets would have had to been to collide and break into pieces to make other planets and stars like just the size of our sun. And our sun is small compared to the out. So where did those two big, again, I'm not trying to downplay the Big Bang Theory, but I am, because it's ridiculous. The ability to have chance come into play there is absolutely unheard of. And I'll give you another one in just a second. So what does this come back to? There has to be an uncaused first cause of the universe. Something can never come from nothing. Something had to be there in the beginning to start it all. I believe that that's God. That's my personal feeling, okay? I think that uncaused first cause is God the creator. In the beginning, God created. That's my opinion. Now, if this is something that interests you, the cosmological, I put some names in the notes about these very popular theologians and apologists that only their whole life they've only studied cosmology in this. J.P. Moreland, William Craig, Samuel Clarke. These guys are the tops of their field. If you want to Google them and look at it, you can. But at the end of the day, what this cosmological argument shows us is that there's a specific relationship between an infinite creator and the finite creation. One had to start the other. I believe that that was God. So let me stop there before I go on to the next one. Any questions or thoughts or comments on the cosmological argument? I know this is, again, guys, I'm giving you this much. We could do a 10-part series just on this part. It's very deep, so I'm not trying to confuse anybody. I'm just trying to give you evidence to help your confidence. And there's people who still believe in the Big Bang, and I respect their opinions, but it's kind of hard to go by chance. And when we get to the next argument, you're going to see even more so that it seems unlikely. Okay, so.
Wait, John, you said earlier
Yes,
there were three. One of them was like
teleological, yes.
What is that word again?
Teleological, that's the next one.
Teleological.
Did you read my notes? Will you read my notes?
Well, I just remember what you said.
You're good, man.
I didn't understand what you said. Like,
it's good, man. No, that's exactly right.
How do you spell that? I'm not sure what it is.
Teleological. Teleological arguments. That is actually the next one that Sanjay just mentioned. And again, guys, there's multiple different arguments in apologetics. Some of them are kind of out there. These are the three main ones that we'll really be able to lock onto. So this argument, the teleological argument, is based on just the amazement and the wonder of design. If you ever look, if you're someone that's into coding or architecture or engineering, like design and sequencing, that's what this is all about, right? The complex functional structures in the world around us, okay? From the very smallest atom to the largest galaxy, there is perfect precision and design. Is it by chance? Probably not. Now, the term teleology, actually, what it means is it's just appealing to design and purpose. Design and purpose, okay? So if I walk into a room and I love blueprints. I love looking at blueprints. My brain doesn't work to write blueprints, but I love to look at them, right? So if I walk in and see this beautiful blueprint laid out on a table, I know that there was a designer who designed the blueprints. They didn't just pop up themselves. So when you look at the intricacies of design in our universe, right down to a bacteria all the way up to the galaxy, it has to imply a designer behind it, okay? So now, this is only giving you evidence of a designer. I can't say that it's the designer that I think it is, God. I think that's who it is, but you can welcome to have your own opinion, of course. So the argument overall, just as a high level, is it's incomprehensible, I think, to think that anything else out there could have done the design as we're going to look at. There has to be someone intelligent to design this and give us this at the cosmic level. This argument, the teleological argument, is all through Scripture. It's in the Old Testament, Psalms 19, Psalms 138. Obviously, Job talked all about it when God was questioning him about the stars in the atmosphere. Paul talks about it in Acts 14 and 17. So it's peppered throughout the Bible, okay, this idea of design and precision. Now, think about the world for a second. There's a total lack of analogy in the world when it comes to observable, natural processes. What do I mean? You never see something spontaneously generating. You may walk out in your driveway in the morning and see a new weed pop up between the cracks in your sidewalk. That's okay, because there's a root underneath. But you will not walk out to your driveway to go get the paper and have a 40-foot oak tree standing on top of your driveway that wasn't there the night before. Right? That can't happen. There is no spontaneous generation of anything in our universe. Nothing. There's no examples of it everywhere. Okay? So, that's something very complex. Did you ever see an oak tree? A massive one? Do you know what they come from? Something this small? How does that come from this? Right? You look at an oak tree 50, 60, 100 feet tall and how wide, and it comes from this.
Yeah.
You say to yourself, how? Yeah, how does that happen? How is that designed? Well, is that chance? No, it isn't. There's a designer. So here's what I want to talk about. Bacteria for a second. Okay, I'm a nurse. I like to talk about bacteria, right? How much more complex and information loaded is a simple organism, a bacteria? We've known about bacteria for many, many years. We have antibiotics, which go after bacteria. But our antibiotics aren't even effective anymore. We have things called super infections now because the antibiotics are too smart and they keep changing and they're getting ahead of our science. Mm-hmm. That is a simple organism, and even with all the brains and science that we have, we still can't figure out how that stuff works. How is that there? How? I think that was because of God. That was God's design. That's not my perfect opinion, but my opinion, okay? So, there's a guy called, if you're into astronomy, his name is Sir Frederick Hoyle. This guy was a big-time astronomer. He talked about amino acids. Okay, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins in our body. That's how our body is built, on amino acids, the most simple form. Okay, he showed how mathematically absurd it would be, even for simple amino acids to be arranged in an order to produce human cells. Now you got to think about this. That's just the very building blocks of a human cell. We're not talking about, look around, look at people's bodies, look at how women have babies. That's just so complex and deep. We can't even get into that. He's talking about the randomness just of amino acids getting together by chance over billions of years just to form a human cell. This is the analogy that he used. He said, what are the chances that a tornado might blow through a junkyard containing all the parts of a 747 plane, accidentally assembling them into a plane and leaving it ready for takeoff? The possibilities are so small as to be negligible, even if a tornado were to blow through enough junkyards to fill the whole universe, right? So the fact that we could just come together from sludge or whatever it was at the beginning, and over time continue to evolve into this complex being, it's just not possible. I'm sorry, I cannot get there. I will respect people's opinion to think that, but the data just doesn't support it. There's a guy called William Paley. You probably heard of him. He wrote a book called Natural Theology. He's a philosopher and a theologian. Fantastic. His whole book, the whole idea about what he believes and what he writes about is the complexity of nature was in fact evidence of the existence of God. I gave you the example last week, right? You're on a desert island, you're stranded, you're walking through a swamp, you see a rock, not a big deal. You see a gold Rolex watch sitting on a stump. Nobody thinks, wow, over 1 million years that came from dust and water and bacteria and formed into this beautiful, complex, wonderful design of a watch. No, you think there's a watch, there's a watchmaker. Right? It's very simple, common sense. Well, if you look at the design of us, I think that there was a designer, and I think that that was God, okay? So everything in life that we see is cause and effect. Every effect has a cause. That cannot be unproven, okay? So when you consider the intricacies of our life and our universe, wouldn't it be reasonable to think that there's an intelligent creator above it all? I think the answer is yes to that. Bunch of people I put in my notes that fall to this teleological argument. If you want to just Google it and look at it, again, some of this stuff is out there. But if you're interested in that, it's in my notes. Okay, that's cosmological, teleological. Now we're going to get to moral. This is one we can all really relate to and one that we need to really understand. So, this argument, the moral argument for the existence of God, demands explanations, okay? There are inescapable, clearly recognized rights and wrongs in the world. I think everybody would agree with that, right? Some behaviors are obligatory and acceptable, some are clearly forbidden and unacceptable. Okay, that's not hard for us to understand. Mankind, we as mankind have an inherent sense of right and wrong, which cannot be biologically explained. There's no morality gene, okay? How do we know what's right and wrong? Well, my parents taught me. Well, who taught them? Well, their parents. Well, who taught them? How far back does it go and where did it start? How did we get this inherent sense of right and wrong, okay? There's no societies, zero, this is the anthropological research, no societies on the planet that lack some sort of ethics or standards for behavior. Now, there's cultural variations. It would be frowned upon to eat each other in America, right? Cannibalism's not accepted. Some cultures, it still is. But for the most part, every culture has ethics, okay? Why? Where did it come from, okay? Let me ask you a question. This is basic moral obligation. If I was to ask 1 billion people around the planet, is it okay to murder or rape a child? No, right? As stupid as that sounds, right? Why do we know that that's not wrong, right? I mean, there's people out there that do that because they have problems, but we understand there's a moral obligation, and that moral obligation can only be explained by a personal source. It's not just, this didn't happen through evolution of our genes, that somehow our brain evolved in a way that put this moral, no one's ever been able to show that, okay? So how do we know it's right or wrong to murder or rape somebody? How do we know that? There has to be a personal source with the authority to establish our moral obligations. I believe that's God. Now, if you're looking for someone who really loves the moral argument, this is my favorite Christian writer, C.S. Lewis. This is his gig, right? And this guy was not a Christian, by the way, until he became a Christian and wrote all his books. So this is what C.S. Lewis says. He argues, rightfully so, I believe, that in our daily conversations and interactions with each other, we have expectations of both myself and other people. You know, when we walked in and I met, Lisa for the first time, or you for the first time, I didn't walk up and crack you across the face and say, welcome to class. Wouldn't that be just an inappropriate thing to do, right? We all speak and we all act amongst each other as if there's moral standards. If we go out to lunch today or at the ale house and there's 10 of us at a table, your expectation is I'm not going to get up and strip down to the nude and walk around and say hi and sit, I know this sounds stupid, and sit down and eat lunch with you, right? I'm not going to reach across the table and crack Miss Carolyn because I don't like what she said. There's moral obligations of what's right and wrong. We know that, okay? I would never do that, Miss Carolyn. I love you. Just for example, right? Let me think about this for a second. You have a friend who's a thief, right? He's a career criminal, robber, robs houses, robs businesses, robs homes, robs people on the street, absolute thief. Even a thief will get upset and feel wrong if someone robs him. Why? Because it's in there for a reason. It was put there for a reason, okay? And then that's not even getting into the more abstract things like courage and love, dying for a cause, dignity, duty, compassion. Where do we get these senses from? Where do they come from, right? If we were, in fact, as some people suggest, just a product of physical evolution, just some kind of material and biological substances all working together, why do we have a sense of right and wrong? Okay, I want you to think about that. If we didn't have inherent morality, we wouldn't even be able to look at what the Nazis did and say that was wrong. We would just be like, oh, yeah, okay. So many people died. Next. We have to know something was wrong. So where does that come from? I believe that's God. Okay, that's what this whole moral argument about the existence of God is. God has put a moral law within us, and God is intensely interested in righteous conduct. read the Bible. He's got a lot to say about how we behave, right? And it all comes from what he says is right and wrong, absolute truth, right? Even things we teach our kids like fair play and unselfishness and courage and good faith, honesty, truthfulness, that all comes from God, okay? The 10 Commandments, you know all about them, gave them to Moses, wrote them on stone, said, this is what I want you to use. They are the supreme and formative place of our moral teaching, right, from the Old Testament. Now, just because the New Testament's here and Jesus came to the 10 Commandments, we would still agree are cool. I would still not want to go out and murder and do all those things. It's still in our hearts. But here's the thing about those. These are moral enactments. God wrote them down as a not to do, but they're moral enactments in our heart. He wrote them in our hearts first, okay? And they're all negative, except for the fifth one. They're all thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, other than honor your mother and father. That's the only positive one. But these are all moral enactments, okay? So I gave Danny a book earlier. It's called America's Providential History. If you guys want to, it's a fantastic book. So if you want to understand where our country started, why America is the greatest nation in the world, why? Because we're a Christian nation. We started as a Christian nation. Over 90% of the laws we have in our society, over 90% of the laws that were written in the Constitution came directly from the Bible. They're not going to teach you that in school and in university. I guarantee teachers in here didn't know that. 90% of our laws and everything we have came directly from the Bible, from our forefathers. That's why we're the greatest nation in the world. That's why the nation is no longer the greatest and most powerful, because we're moving to the left, away from morality, away from God's moral standards, and that's why we're going the way we are. But if you want to see where we came from, our real history, read that book. I promise you, your eyes will be open to what God expects from us as Christians, okay? Now, that's another argument, right? The moral argument. I think that's probably the one that we would be able to lock in the most and understand if you look at our world where it is today. So some of these are kind of abstract and difficult to get. Some of them are kind of straightforward. And none of them are exact. But if you look at these arguments, along with the other ones, it's like one strand of cord, not that strong of a rope. But if you take 30 strands, 30 arguments, and you put them all together, all of a sudden, the evidence for the existence of God becomes very, very strong. And again, you guys know where I stand, and I probably know where you stand. I'm not trying to convince you, but I am trying to give you more evidence and more confidence of where we came from. Because sometimes you got to start at the beginning with people who were absolute atheists and grew up in a house they never knew about God, and they need to understand there is something bigger and better. Okay? So, we just proved, in my mind, that's kind of simple, that God exists. The next question in the moral thing, or the logical sequence, would be, did Jesus exist? That's going to sound really dumb to you guys, but there is a thing out there called the Jesus myth. You may have never heard about this, but I'm going to tell you what it is, and it's kind of laughable, and I'm not, again, not trying to be disrespectful to what people think, but it's laughable. So one of the ideas that still persists today in circles is called the Jesus myth, right? It's the idea that Jesus Christ never actually existed. He wasn't even a real person on earth. This is the myth, okay? This was founded in the 1800s by a German scholar. His name is Bruno Bauer. Not a theologian, not a historian, probably an atheist in the school of Voltaire, like that kind of a guy. So the question becomes, does this Jesus myth have any scholarly support? No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you all the support for Jesus, and most of the support that Jesus was really here comes from non-Christian sources, so it's not biased, okay? So this one's a little bit, it almost feels like people are like, Don, I understand Jesus exists, but remember, some people don't believe that. And if you don't believe God exists, then there's a good chance that Jesus didn't either. So you have to look at it from their point of view, right? The historicity of Jesus, which means did Jesus exist as a person, is just as certain as that of Julius Caesar. And I'm going to prove that to you in just a minute. But let me tell you why this is such an absurd myth anyways. Just think about this commonsensically, okay? If in fact Jesus never existed, right? The fact that we have no evidence going against the historicity of Jesus in the first century just tells us right there. This information didn't come out to the 1800s. If Jesus didn't really exist in the first century, do you know what the Jews, the unbelieving Jews, and the Gentiles and the other people would have done? They would have immediately squashed that theory on the spot. They wouldn't have waited 1700 years to say, No, that guy never existed. They would have hammered that right at the beginning, that this guy was never here, that crucifixion never happened, this never happened, that's a joke. No one said anything about this for 1,700 years, and these guys are atheists. Here's another question, common sense. Put yourself in this position. Why would the apostles, why would the followers of Christ, the disciples of Christ, allow themselves to be pursued and persecuted and killed if Jesus didn't exist? Anybody? No reason. Not going to happen. Okay, let me give you some evidence. I'm going to give you some evidence from the Christian sources first. Is there Christian sources? Yeah, it's called the New Testament, right? We have 27 different New Testament documents proving Jesus Christ's life, death, resurrection, all of his works. We also have the writings of the early church fathers. If you've ever taken any religious studies, you'll know these names. Polycarp, Eusebius, Ignatius, Justin, Origen, all these guys. Most of these guys were disciples of the original apostles. So they learned from the main guys, and then some of them were disciples of the disciples. These were the guys that were the bishops of the early churches. These were the real smart guys who kept on writing the same things in the same way that the first century writers, the apostles, wrote, okay? And now most historians, and I don't just mean theological historians, most historians agree that all of the New Testament writings and all of the early church writings are so consistent that they absolutely prove the existence of Jesus. I know I'm not having to prove to you guys that Jesus is real, but this is what people think. Let me give you a little example. What we know of Alexander, does everybody know who Alexander the Great is? You believe he was real? He was. What we know about Alexander the Great could literally fit on one notebook of paper. Okay, no one questions that. What we know of Jesus Christ fills libraries all over the earth. So it's kind of laughable, but again, I'm trying to do this objectively and putting the evidence out there so you guys can figure this out. Okay, that was Christian sources, so maybe they're a little biased. Let's look at secular sources for the existence of Jesus, okay? This is a guy called Cornelius Tacitus. I've mentioned Tacitus' name before in some of our teachings. He was a Roman historian, wrote in the 1st century AD 112, right? Obviously a Roman, he's polytheistic, doesn't believe in God, not a Jesus fan, not a Christian. So this guy is a true historian, totally objective. His annals that he wrote, some of his writings, provide us with one of the single most important references to Jesus Christ from anything that we know. I'm going to read this whole thing. Now, the background behind this thing is he's writing about Nero. You remember that psycho Nero who burned down Rome and then blamed the Christians? That's what this guy is writing about here. And he mentions Jesus in this. I'm going to read this to you. It's a little bit long, but listen to this. This is his writing in this is writing about the event that happened in 64 AD when Nero burned the whole city down. But not all the relief that could come from man, not all the bounties that the prince could bestow, nor all the atonements which could be presented to the gods, availed to relieve Nero from the infamy of being believed to have ordered the conflagration or the fire of Rome. Everybody knows Nero did this. Hence, to suppress the rumors, Nero falsely charged with the guilt and punished Christians who were hated for their enormities. Christus, it's Jesus, the founder of the name, was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procreator of Judea in the reign of Tiberius. This is all biblical information that's in our Bible. But the pernicious superstition, that's the belief of the Christians, repressed for a little while, broke out again. In other words, they couldn't shut the Christians up, even though they were killing them and burning them at the stake. Okay? Not only through Judea, where the mischief originated, but through the city of Rome also, where all the things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Rome was a nasty place. Accordingly, an arrest was made of all who pleaded guilty, that is, people who admitted to being followers of Jesus. Not guilty for burning the city down, but for following Christ. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred against mankind. So this guy is writing exactly what happened to the Christians, exactly who they were, who followed Christ, the guy who put Jesus to death, and the guy who was the Caesar at the time. Okay, that's historical evidence from a Roman. Okay, the Tacitian literature is one of the most respected bits of world history. Guys like Herodotus and Edward Gibbon and Leopold von Ranke, these are huge historic people. They all praise this guy's literature for being absolutely accurate. Okay, let's talk about another guy. This is a Jewish historian. You'll know this guy's name, Flavius Josephus, known as Josephus. Okay, he was born in 37 AD. so a couple years after Jesus died. He was a Pharisee at age 19, right? So obviously he was not a believer in Christ. He was part of the Pharisees, right? And in 66 AD, he became the commander of the Jewish forces. He was way up there. Obviously not a Jesus follower, right? He was captured by the Romans and then had to live in Roman headquarters for many years. So he wrote Jewish history, but he also wrote a lot of Roman history because he got to see it firsthand. So this guy's a great source. His main writing that Josephus wrote is called Antiquities of the Jews. I have the book. If you're ever interested in Jewish history, it's a great book to read if you're interested in that kind of thing. Now, he has two really important quotes in his Antiquities. I'm going to read both of them. This is the smaller one. He said, "But the younger Ananias," that's Ananias, who is the high priest, right, who, as we received the high priesthood, was of bold disposition and exceptionally daring. He followed the party of the Sadducees, who are severe in judgment above all Jews, as we have already shown. He wasn't a big fan of the Sadducees, as you can see. As therefore Ananias was of such a disposition, he thought he now had a good opportunity, as Festus was now dead. Remember the story I told you guys about Felix and Festus, when Paul was imprisoned in Rome and he died, and they were trying to send Paul up to see Caesar, but they had to give a reason, and he met with this guy Festus. So he's mentioning Festus by name. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was still on the road. So he assembled the council of judges and brought before the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, whose name was James, Jesus' brother James, together with some others, and having accused them of lawbreakers, he delivered them over to be stoned. So there's an actual name of Jesus, Jesus' brother, the governor Festus, the high priest Ananias, all of which is in our Bible. This is a non-Christian source proving that. Here's the second thing that he wrote. This is the most famous thing that Josephus wrote. It's referred to as the Testimonium Flavianum. That's what it's called. Really the testimony of Christ is what this is. This is what he wrote. "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of principal men among us, had him condemned to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day." There it is, okay? "As the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things according to him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct until this day." This is testimony that Jesus Christ went to the cross, died, and resurrected the third day from someone who was not a Christian, okay, who knew Jewish culture. Can't get any stronger than that. Let me give you another one. This guy's name is Thallus. Now this guy is a Samaritan historian. You know the story of the Samaritans and the Jews. Oil and water, hate each other. Like literally, the Jews wouldn't even walk through Samaria. They would walk an extra 30 miles just to not go through their country because they thought they were dogs. They hated them. So this guy, obviously not a follower, was another historian writing about Jesus. This is absolutely amazing. So Thallus wrote somewhere in the mid-50s AD. What he was doing in his annal, in his writing, he was trying to give a natural explanation for the darkness that happened at Jesus' crucifixion. Basically, when those 3 hours happened, it was a total eclipse of the sun, which if you go back in history, you can look back at 33 AD in the solar charts. You can Google this and see there was not a solar eclipse. We know when all the solar eclipses were. Wasn't. This guy's trying to give a natural explanation to people what the heck happened for that 3 hours that everything went dark. This is his explanation. And this was written by another writer, Julius Africanus. He's another writer. But he's writing what Thallus wrote in his book. This is what it says. "Thallus, in the third book of his Histories, explains away this darkness as an eclipse of the sun. Unreasonably, as it seems to me, unreasonably, of course, because a solar eclipse could not take place at the time of the full moon, and it was at the season of the Paschal full moon that Christ died. Could not have been a total eclipse of the sun. We know that today just from astronomy. We can go back and look at the charts. But this guy was giving a explanation to everybody in and around. He was in Samaria, right? He's not even in Jerusalem. he was given an explanation as to what happened. Here's what the Bible says, by the way, on that day. Matthew 27:45. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, that's from 12 to 3 p.m., darkness came over the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is the description that this guy, Thallus, was trying to describe. Another person describing exactly what the Bible tells us happened. Okay? Let me give you one more. Pliny the Younger. I'm assuming there's a Pliny the Elder, but I don't know him, so this is Pliny the Younger. This guy was a governor of Bithynia. This guy was a pretty powerful man. He was writing in 106 AD. He was writing specifically to the emperor at the time, who was Trajan. We know him. He's in the Bible as well. Right? He was including his report on what they were doing to Christians. They were slaughtering Christians left and right. And this guy was getting sick of it. Okay? So he writes this extended explanation to Trajan, his supervisor, explaining that he had been killing men and women, boys and girls, just slaughtering people left and right. Right? He was asking him, there's so many being put to death that I wonder if he should continue killing anyone who was discovered to be a Christian, or if he should just kill certain ones. He goes on to say that he also forced them to curse Christ, which a genuine Christian cannot be induced to do, he said. Okay? He was trying to get these people just to curse Jesus. All the Christians had to do when the Romans came up on them, it says, I don't believe in that Jesus Christ. I was just kidding. There's no such thing. All they had to do was deny Christ, and they would have just walked away from him, and they never would have died. But this guy says, I was trying to get them to curse Christ, and they wouldn't do it. Okay? People don't just die for something they don't believe in. That's not real. Okay? This is what he wrote. They affirmed, this is the Christians, however, that the whole of their guilt or their error was that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, Sunday morning, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to God. And they bound themselves to a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but to never commit any fraud or theft or adultery, never to falsify their word, not to deny a trust that they had when they were called upon to deliver it up. So when these people were being interrogated by Pliny and these other people, all they said was, we're just guilty of getting together in church on Sunday morning, singing to Jesus, and we're just trying to be kind to people. This is what we're doing. If we're guilty, go ahead. And they killed them. They slaughtered them. They burned them at the stake, right? Nobody is going to die for somebody that's not real. That doesn't make sense. These people knew that Jesus Christ was real, and they went and they died for it, okay? Now, the most important thing about Pliny's, I think, writing is that this was very unlikely that these people would have done that if, in fact, Jesus Christ was never there. It just doesn't make sense, okay? So again, this idea of the Jesus myth, it's groundless speculation. Needless to say, I think we already understood that. There's so much historical evidence for the Jesus Christ life that we can't deny it. Here's the more important question that we need to think about. There's no doubt that Jesus is a validated historical person, okay? There's no doubt that God existed and created us. The bigger question is this, and this is what we're going to do next week. Is Jesus who he said he was? Is Jesus who Scripture prophesied him to be? Is he the Christ? Okay, so that's going to be the next thing that we're going to study next week. Let me stop there.